Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is in Eau Claire. We're on the campus of Chippewa Valley Tech College. We're interviewing Tony Kurtz, Prairie du Chien. He's a Republican running in the 3rd Congressional District. Tony, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Tony, I want to start out this way. You were in the Army for 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. You probably watched, maybe unless you were campaigning, President Obama's speech.
Yes, I did.
As a career military officer, your response to, are you in agreement with the president's emphasis to stop ISIS or ISIL, whichever you want to?
Yes, I am. I thought that was a good first step. I'm not going to be very honest with you, Steve. I think it's a couple weeks behind. I wish he was a little bit more upfront in the beginning. A couple weeks ago, he did come out to the American people and basically said he had no plan, no strategy whatsoever. So as a veteran, as somebody that had boots on the ground, and just to let you know, my wife also had boots on the ground over there. So as a family of veterans and so many veterans in our district, I was reassured by his comments. I support his plan. I do disagree to a point. I don't like ruling out any option, and I want people to understand, I'm not advocating putting boots on the ground. That's the last thing I'm doing. But as the commander-in-chief, you don't just automatically say, well, we're not going to put boots on the ground. That to me just sends a wrong message to the enemy. That's the part I didn't like, just to be very honest with you. But no, I thought it was a good first step. I like how he wants to build a coalition. It is the Middle Eastern. The Middle East has to govern themselves. They really do. But ISIS, it's not a threat that we've seen before. I hate to say this. I go back to Adolf Hitler. This is evil. And I think as a nation, we have to be prepared, and like I said, I don't say this lightly because I've been there. I know these consequences, and I don't, I could take the easy way out and say, I don't want boots on the ground either. But I would be doing a disservice to this nation, to our district, if I didn't tell you what I thought. To be very honest with you. So,
given the turmoil recently internationally in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, what as a veteran, long year service in the military, what do you think is the new justification for boots on the ground, sir?
I hear that from so many people. Today I actually had a conversation with a gentleman that has 3 sons in the military. And he told me this morning, Tony, he said, I don't want my sons to go back to Iraq. I don't want them to, I don't. But I talked to Joe about this, and I said, Joe, and he was a Vietnam vet. He's been there before, I've been there. I said, I don't want that any more than you do. But we can't telegraph to our enemies that we won't do something. And he agreed with that. It's just that he wanted to know, Tony, make sure this is the last thing we do. And I get that, because it's the last thing I want to do, to send somebody in a situation that my wife was in Somalia. And, people ask why we're in Somalia. And that is a question we need to ask. I personally, I had a good conversation with some people this week about Afghanistan. And I think Afghanistan, I'd like to see us leave Afghanistan. I think that's, and I hate to say that, I think it truly is a lost cause right now. I think our focus needs to be on the Middle East. I think that's an immediate threat to our allies there, and most importantly to the Americans that are in Iraq and in the broader Middle East. You talk about Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Israel. We don't want this to spread. So, we do need to have a conversation. Do we get our nose in some other's business sometimes? I guess we could talk about Somalia. We could talk about some other hot spots on the issue. But I feel strongly about this ISIS. I truly do. we need to confront it.
Given the nature of the threat, does Congress need to pass a declaration of war on ISIS, Tony?
The president, I truly believe the president does have an authority to do the airstrikes and everything. I was very, I was happy when he said that he's going to consult with Congress. I think that's the right thing to do, to get a consensus, because we are war weary right now. This country is. You know, I hope you hear it in my voice. You know, I heard it in Joe's voice this morning. You know, we are, and the problem is our enemies around the world know this as well. And that's why they're seizing on these opportunities, Steve. You know, you look at Putin, you look at what happens with ISIS, you look at China. They see this weariness, and I truly believe they're seizing on the opportunity.
So just a final question on the issue. If you remember the U.S. House, then you would vote to approve paying the bills for this additional military action to attack ISIS, sir?
Yes, I think we have to. And the reason why, I think longer term, it would be a much greater loss, much greater cost if we don't confront this now in its infancy.
If we spend new money on ISIS with the approval of Congress, where do we go to address a major issue on your campaign website, which you say, speaking about the deficit, isn't it time we elect representatives that are ready to bite the bullet and do what needs to be done? So my question is, if you have to spend more to attack ISIS, to bring the deficit in line, to begin to bring it in line, what has to be cut?
We got to look at the priorities, Steve. You know, I'm open to all, and like I said, everything has to be on the table. The problem right now in Washington, it's such a toxic environment. You can't even bring an idea up. It's like, you know, me running for Congress here. I bring something up, and it's like automatically I'm criticized for bringing an idea up, and that's where I think, as your representative, I want to bring up ideas. And you're right, we have to pay for this, and I understand that. And trust me, with the financial condition of the United States, you know, it's the last thing we need to have this happen. I'm just looking long term. The cost long term would be much greater in the long term than it will be right now. But no, everything needs to be on the table to look at what we got to spend.
Congress's approval ratings between 8 and 15%. If you're in the House next year, what would you do to raise this?
Just talking to people. One thing I've done in this campaign is I talk to people. I talk to all different types of people that I know we're not going to agree on things. But it's amazing when we sit down and we talk, we do have common ground. We all know what we want. That's the thing. You know, we want good health care. We want good schools. We want to fix the debt. It's just we all have different ideas how to get that. I personally believe the environment in Washington, D.C. right now is so toxic that until we make some drastic changes with the people that are in Washington, D.C., I don't think you're going to change that environment until you change the people there.
A major issue, of course, is health care. What do you think has been the impact on Wisconsin of the Affordable Care Act, sir?
Uncertainty. Confusion. You know, those are the terms I hear so much. You know, in 2010, the president, along with Nancy Pelosi and Congressman Kind, you know, they touted that this was good for this district, that we needed it here in west central Wisconsin. The fact is we did not need it here in west central Wisconsin. 93% of the people here in our district had health insurance. The Wisconsin Hospital Association, which is sponsoring this, you know, for the last 6 years, the state of Wisconsin has been in the top 5 states for health care. So when you look at this district, Obamacare, we did not need Obamacare. Now, did we need to address the cost of health care? Absolutely. But this broad brush all over the United States with one size fits all was not for this district. And Congressman Kind promised the men and women of this district, you could keep your doctor, you could keep your health care. It was going to save money. Steve, all these are broken promises. You know, I talked to a gentleman last week at an American Legion event. His name was Bill and his wife was Roxanne. And Bill's thinking about leaving his job early. He's 61 years old. And he said, I did some checking on healthcare.gov, looked at a bronze plan. His bronze plan was going to be $1,450 a month.
A month.
Plus an $11,000 deductible. And he looked at me right in the eye. He said, Tony, I'm rethinking not stepping down from my job. I said, my job's looking pretty good right now because I have health care. So, you know, the President and Congressman Kine, you know, before a couple months ago, they were touting, well, you know, it's going to let people get out of that employer insurance. Well, no, not for Bill and Roxanne, it's not. So, you know, this was not good for this district. Now, I will confess, we need to fix the affordability, absolutely. But this broad brush, one-size-fits-all is not the answer for the men and women of this district.
Well, House Republicans voted more than 50 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. If you're there in the next session, would you vote to repeal it? And if so, what about the three provisions that appear popular? No limit, no pre-existing conditions, no limit on coverage, and young people through age 26 can get it through the parent.
I would support repealing it, but I would not support that unless we had a plan to replace it. That's one thing where Republicans get a bad rap, that we don't have a plan. I do have a plan. I want people to be covered for pre-existing conditions. Anybody in their right mind wants to do that. I mean, you know, I believe in competition. I want people to go shop for insurance anywhere they want. One thing we're very fortunate in West Central Wisconsin is we've got some fantastic hospitals. You know, you look at Viterbo, where my wife went to medical school, you know, nursing school. We got UW-Eau Claire here, has a fantastic nursing school. We need to take advantage of that, and we can actually get people from Minnesota and Iowa, like Prairie du Chien. You know, they just opened a new clinic, Crossing Rivers Healthcare. They're marketing to get people from Minnesota and Iowa. So, you know, let's broaden the insurance pool and open markets up to competition, and I think that's one of the parts to help healthcare, to make it affordability where we have competition.
Transportation funding. Congress recently passed a Band-Aid lowering, actually taking more, corporations will pay more but contribute less to pensions.
Yes.
That's only good for a few months. Right. What's a long-term solution?
Pension smoothing is what I believe what we're getting at.
Smoothing is the term, yes.
And all that is an accounting gimmick, because basically they're allowing them to reduce their inputs to their pension funds, right. So they're going to end up paying more taxes.
So they will have
for the
more
next
profits
couple to pay
they will
taxes.
Pay more taxes.
To me, that is not a very good solution.
What's a better way?
Well, the better way, let's this. First of all, let's get back to some basics. Congressman Kine, the other couple months ago, he released this letter basically saying that he was against all these short-term extensions. And recently, they just approved another 10-month extension, which is interesting because Congressman Kine's been in office for going on 18 years. The last 11 years, they've approved, I believe, 21 different extensions. So my point to voters is, why is he not standing up and saying, let's get a long-term solution? One of those long-term solutions is look at what is being spent with this fund. 25% of the money, which is about, for 2013, $12.5 billion was spent on non-road projects. So for landscaping projects, bike paths, nature paths. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for bike paths and nature paths, but that's something a state or a county can do at local level. Get the Highway Trust Fund, get it back to its basics, what it's for. It's for roads. So you take $12.2 billion in 1 year and start adding that up, that's going to add up in some real savings. So let's get back to some basics, make sure that money is being used for what it's for.
Is it time to raise the federal gas tax? That hasn't been raised since 1993. I looked it up.
No, you're right, and that's something I think needs to be discussed and put on the table. And like I said, I'm open to that discussion because you're right. We have to do something. We all use the roads, and that is a real issue. But one thing I want to do. You know, I sat through a town board meeting in Onalaska a couple weeks ago, and when one of the town board chairmen got up, that was the first words out of his mouth was about the county roads. About the roads. And then I was in Vernon County talking to the road commissioner there. We were talking one-on-one. That's what he was saying. It's just the uncertainty. And so when they do this patchwork, it does not help the states. It does not help these companies have long-term contracts to get the best prices they can. So that's one of the things I want to work on is a long-term 5-year or 6-year solution. And like I said, I think that option should be on the table.
Voters, as you've learned, sometimes can't track federal and state issues. Here's my questions. Mm-hmm. You must be being asked about the explosion of frac sand mining.
Yes, I am.
What are you telling people who ask whether it's we now have a balance between local control and the exploding business of frac sand mining?
My thing on that is, once again, I think that's a state and a local issue, and that's the way I've been handling that. I truly believe in the lowest level should address that, and that the local, I just think local control is the best thing, and let them handle that down.
Okay.
So.
Immigration reform is another thing that
Yes.
hasn't passed. What provisions would you push for, both with the 10 or 12 million people that are here illegally and 57,000,
Right.
many of them children who came from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador?
Steve, I believe the last time you and I spoke, I think it was down in Madison, that was one of the bigger topics at that time was the border. I was stationed at Fort Hood, and I actually flew along that border. I personally think this needs to be in a two-step process. The first thing is we have to secure the border. We've been talking about this for years, securing the border. Let's do it. Let's have the will to do that. And I'll tell you, especially if you look what's going on in the world right now, you have the threat of ISIS. There's so much concern about ISIS and homegrown terrorists and terrorists coming up for our southern border. I hate to bring this up, Ebola and all the other infectious diseases that are going around the world. Now's the right time to secure our border. So let's do that first. Let's secure the border. Okay. And then as far as immigration, we need to have an honest discussion about what's good for this country. We're all from immigrants. I am. I'm sure you are too, Steve. I know my wife is. But we have such a problem. We really don't know how many we have. That's the first thing. So we need to find out how many you have. Obviously, they've all broken laws because they've all crossed the border illegally. But those that have, felonies, misdemeanors, they need to go back immediately. One of the other things I'd like to do is, I would like people to have a set of a penalty or a fee where they have to pay. They have to learn English. They have to get at the end of the line. But obviously, these individuals that have felons, that have certain crimes, they need to go back immediately and not come back. I mean, basically they are not allowed to have citizenship, something like that. I would support something like that, and I think that's something we need to move in the direction. But once again, first we need to secure that border.
The 57,000 children, should they just be deported?
You and I talked about this. Yeah, yes, I do. I believe with that, and I know, once again, that's just, I fundamentally believe that yes, they need to go back and come in the right way.
Environmental questions. Do you support the Obama administration's limit on carbon emissions?
I do not.
Why?
I just don't think we need the federal government limiting those. The thing I'd like to talk about is the Keystone Pipeline. The Keystone Pipeline is something that we need to approve. It's long overdue. Right now, especially here in Wisconsin, with our railroad, a big argument right now is the number of rail cars and the increase of rail traffic carrying oil down south. That Keystone Pipeline is going to relieve a lot of those rail cars. Okay? Right now, we have a problem getting enough coal for this year because so many cars are carrying the oil. Also, grain shipments. So we need to have a discussion on this Keystone Pipeline. One of the things I've always talked about is, one of the arguments about the Keystone Pipeline is all that crude's going to go down south and be shipped offshore. Why not have more refinery capacity right here in the Midwest? To me, that would stop that argument. Let's get the crude oil here. Let's refine it. Excess can go down and be shipped offshore, but let's take care of what we have at home. You imagine what that would do to our economy? I mean, it would just, to me, it would be such a win-win for this area, for lowering the prices and getting jobs and refinery capacity. Is just something to me I think makes sense, and that's something I'd really like to see done.
One issue that's emerged since the last time we talked is the idea of American corporations that are domiciled here reorganizing under foreign tax laws to lower their taxes. Mm-hmm. It's called inversion. Yep. Would you support legislation to stop that?
I want to support legislation to redo the entire tax code. Look at our corporate tax rate. And I've been on the record for this. Our tax code right now is such a burden on businesses, small, large, and to a point even on individuals. So let's go back and redo this taxes. I'm for either a flat tax, a fair tax, something more than we have right now. Another thing you look at all the corporate money that's overseas staying over there. We need to think about getting this money back over here. once again, you imagine what a boost that is to the economy. So let's talk about tax reform as part of the conversation on that.
When we talk about big money, we're seeing that more and more in political campaigns in the wake of Citizens United. There's some in Washington that want a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. Your position?
I don't think we need a constitutional amendment to do that. My position on that is I'm a big believer in term limits. I don't know why we don't have them. We obviously have them for the president. I think that's a good way to stem some of this money. Right now, Congressman Kine gets 72% of his money from political action committees, from PACs. To me, that helps these lifetime politicians that have been, he's once again going on 9 terms, been in there for almost 18 years, and I just think term limits would really quell a lot of that money coming in from outside interests, like the PACs. I believe in a 12-12, and like I said, since we were at the TV, well, let's go on the record. I believe 12 years for a congressman, that would be 6 terms, and 12 years for a senator, that's 2 terms. I think if you can't get something done in that time, then you don't need to be there in the first place. And once again, if you put term limits on people, I think that's going to empower them to work together, to get things done for the common, for what's best for their district. And like I said, I'm a big believer in the term limits. I think that would help with this money. There's so much money in politics.
Do you expect third-party independent groups to play a role in the coming campaign, but between you and Congressman Kine, on both sides?
Steve, I think I've already seen some third-party ads supported to Ron Kine. That I've seen. On my side, I have no idea. I have no information on that, and I don't think I can even have information on that. But no, I don't know. I would be surprised if outside organizations did not come in for Congressman Kine. If you look at the PAC, like I said, 72% it was from insurance companies and healthcare companies. So it would not surprise me, no.
If there's third-party spending on behalf of Congressman Kine, would you welcome third-party spending to help your campaign, Tony?
Ooh, that's that's something I'm going to have to think about, Steve. That's okay. Something I haven't really thought about that, to be honest with you. But that's something if it comes to that, yes, I'll have to think about.
Let's come back to a question I asked you at our last interview. The fiscal picture is somewhat improved on both Medicare and Social Security, but they're still on track to go bankrupt.
Oh yeah, it's.
How would you address that looming bankruptcy?
Well, once again, I want to go step back a little bit. I'm 47 years old. I joined the military right when I was 18 years old, and when I was 18 years old, going into the military, this was a problem then. So we keep kicking this can down the road, and there's going to be a point, Steve, as you well know, that we're coming to the edge. And Congressman Ryan, I'll give him a lot of credit. He's come out with some plans. Those are some plans I think are a great starting point, a good place to start. And once again, here's a man that has come up with a plan. He's taken a lot of criticism for it, but at least he's opening the discussion on it, and that's a discussion we have to have. And I think that's a good starting point with what Congressman Ryan has.
Do you like his idea of block granting anti-poverty programs to the states?
Yeah, I like that idea. No, I do like that. Let the states handle it. Yeah. I think the states can better manage than the federal government.
Were you surprised at the disclosures in the leaks by Mr. Snowden in terms of the NSA practices?
The NSA
data collection.
The NSA practices should disturb us all. I think they need to be reined in. There should be probable cause before they do what they have been doing. I think that's just a good common sense approach. And yes, I think that does need to be reined in. I think they've overstepped their bounds. Yes.
Oh, okay. Your district is largely rural. Mm-hmm. What needs to be done in terms of farm programs?
The one thing our district, and I've driven over 35,000 miles since January, and I have visited so many communities, so many farms, and we have a great heritage here. That's one of the things. In 2006, I started my farm. I started with 56 acres, and I got 210 acres. And so I know the struggles to start that farm and keep it going. And we got to get back to, the Farm Bill was just recently passed, but I want to get back to a true Farm Bill. That Farm Bill 80% of it was food stamps and SNAP. So I personally, in the future, would like to see that separated. And let's get to a true farm bill. Congressman Kine voted against this farm bill, and I know he mentioned about the huge subsidies for big corporate farms. Personally, I think it was a political move. That's just my personal opinion. But in this farm bill, it was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But once again, I think some horse trading was done because, once again, 80% was food stamps and SNAP, where only 20% was actually directly for ag. I thought the crop insurance was something that needed to be addressed. As a veteran, and so many other veterans, once again, our district is very rich and obviously in agriculture, but also in veterans. And there's a lot of veterans that are coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan that are trying to get into farming. And this farm bill actually allowed them to be treated as a beginning farmer for veterans. And like I said, so for these returning veterans now, it's an option for them. Also, it did help with some of the other programs. You know, obviously, there's a lot of good organic that's growing in our area. You know, that's a big market. Obviously, for the conventional and organic, there's enough market for both. That's one thing I want to make perfectly clear. But the farm bill, once again, wasn't perfect, but for our district, it was a step in the right direction.
Have you had veterans in the 3rd District tell you that they were caught up in the problems at the VA where they didn't get timely care?
No. Let's talk about that. What I did, and I got to look at the thing, about 8 weeks ago, we did a listening session. We did 6 sessions around the district talking specifically on VA issues. And one thing I found about our VA issues is we have a wonderful facility in Tomah. I visited down in Madison. That's where I go. Tomah, I've went to Tomah before, and as soon as you get out of the car, you're greeted by somebody. I mean, the customer service, the care, the service is outstanding in Tomah. Now, here's the problem. Tomah does have a shortage of doctors and nurses and healthcare providers. There's a lot of good things going on there. So we've got to make sure we have a conversation. And the VA bill that just passed did address the funding for keeping doctors and healthcare providers.
You would have voted for that?
Yes, I would, because now I will make a caveat to that. I was not real excited about opening the additional clinics, and here's why. And right now, let's get our house in orders with the VA clinics and the VA hospitals we have now before we expand service. That's the only part of the bill I did not like, to be honest. But if I can add one thing about why the veterans issue is important for all of us. I talked to 2 different veterans during those listening sessions. One was a very young man. His name was Brian, and it was over in Alma. And Brian got out of the military in 2006, and he went to Milwaukee. It was his first appointment with the VA. He had such a horrible experience. His doctor was rude. He was having a certain procedure that requires a little bit of sensitivity, and he just felt horrible when he left the office. And he never went back. And so in the meantime, he had a disability, a connected service disability. He was paying for that all out of pocket. And so finally, it was 1 July was his appointment in Tomah. He went back to Tomah after all those years. He went back to Tomah, and he said at Tony it was like a breath of fresh air. Talked to another gentleman over in Stevens Point at Plover Days, and he went down to Marion, Illinois for his VA care years ago. Once again, same experience. It was awful. He said, I'll never go back. So how you're treated at the VA at other facilities affects your decision-making later on in life. And I've talked to mothers whose sons have expressed interest of going in the military. And so I was at a Rotary meeting, matter of fact, and one of these ladies came up to me and she goes, you know, my son wants to go in the military. And I don't want him to go in the military. And I said, why is that? And he goes, well, you got obviously the conflicts, but also the VA. And so she's worried about her son's long-term care. So do you see my point on why these VA issues matter?
Yes. Okay. Finally, you've talked about a few differences with Congressman Kine. Mm-hmm. Any others you want to highlight, sir, in closing?
What I want the men and women, the folks in this district to look at is, I would really like them to look at my resume. You know, I'm 47 years old. There's so many things going on in the world right now when you look at foreign policy. You know, I spent 20 years serving this country. I've been overseas. You know, I was stationed in Germany for almost 4 years. I've been to South Korea, twice in Iraq. I bring a lot to the table, and my master's degree in international relations, on what you see going on the world stage when you look at veterans issues. And then when you look at what the makeup of this district is, so many small businesses and so many small farms. That's something I did after I retired from the service, I had to start a small business. I had to start that farm from scratch. So I know what the folks are going through in this district when you have to have all this dysfunctional federal government basically controlling everything, and I feel that because I had to do that, and that's all I would like the folks to understand. And Congressman Kine, this is not, again, I've met Congressman Kine. He's a nice guy. He really is. But we're just different in that way. I think, like I said, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony Kurtz of Prairie du Chien is a Republican candidate in the 3rd Congressional District. The election is November 4th. Tony, thanks again for talking to Wisconsin.
Always enjoy talking to you.
Thank you.